Well, as President Trump lashes out at Democratic investigations, the Treasury Department is reportedly preparing a plan to keep the president's tax returns private. President Trump broke away from 40 years of executive tradition by not releasing his taxes during the 2016 campaign. He blamed an IRS audit, but the new Democratic House majority is preparing to demand and investigate the president's past personal tax returns. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi explained why earlier today.
I think overwhelmingly the public wants to see the president's tax returns. And so they want to know the truth. They want to know the facts. And he has nothing to hide.
But according to reporting out this week from Politico, Treasury Department officials plan to subject Democrats' demands to a, quote, quagmire of arcane legal arguments. Joining me now, White House reporter who wrote that article, Nancy Cook, joins me now. Nancy, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you, though, how do Treasury Department officials plan to shield the president's past tax returns at this point?
Well, basically, there's sort of a two-pronged strategy that they're going to take. One, they're going to question the legality of the Democrats on the Hill actually accessing those tax returns. And then two, they're going to wage a public relations campaign, basically, to say that, you know, tax returns should be kept private. People on Capitol Hill can't necessarily be trusted to keep that information private. And their overarching argument is that this is an overtly partisan request, and therefore they shouldn't have to honor it.
How strong of a legal argument is that?
Well, I think that, you know, it kind of depends who you ask. I've talked to a bunch of different people who headed up the Joint Committee on Taxation, which is the congressional committee that deals with this. And they said that there's no question that the committees can access the tax returns. That is very clear in the Internal Revenue Code. But if those tax returns do become public without them taking a vote out of committee or a vote on the floor to make them public, it is a felony to release any details. And so Democrats do have a little bit of a risk. But I think the Treasury's overall strategy is basically to drown this request in so many sort of legal nitpicky arguments that they end up delaying the process of actually giving the returns to the Hill, you know, for months or potentially even years through the end of Trump's first term.
Nancy, you write that the one person who will need to be convinced to move this along is actually a Democrat. Can you explain that?
Sure. So the head of the House Tax Writing Committee at this point is this guy, Richard Neal. He's the new chairman of the committee once Democrats took over the House in January. He has been in Congress since 1988. He's a Massachusetts Democrat, and he has long wanted to chair this tax writing committee. He is not seen as progressive as some other new folks in the caucus, and he's very interested in wonky issues like the tax issues related to Obamacare. And so he's sort of a reluctant protagonist or prosecutor to try to land Trump's tax returns. And so far, he's been taking a very cautious approach. You know, Treasury officials, I think, thought that they would have a request from him for those returns on January 3rd, and he hasn't done it yet.
Ultimately, though, what would you say Democrats are really looking to find in the president's tax returns?
Well, I think there's just so much speculation about what could potentially be in there. It could be something like, you know, Trump didn't actually pay any federal income taxes. It could be something that gives insight into how his businesses are structured or how he dealt with foreign governments. And so I think that there's a bunch of different things in there. But, you know, they will have to look at, to find information like that, they would have to look at not only his individual tax returns, but also his business tax returns. And those are complex documents, and it will take them a long time to study them and see if there's actually anything there. And there's no guarantee that they'll find sort of the smoking gun that they may be looking for.
And Nancy, on top of all this, House Democrats included a provision in their first bill to actually force presidential candidates to release 10 years of tax returns. Why are Democrats trying to push this now?
Well, I think that they're interested in doing that because, you know, historically in modern history, all presidential candidates have released their tax returns. It wasn't anything written into law, but it was something that presidential candidates just felt like they needed to do. And Trump, you know, in many ways, similar to the tax return issue, bucked tradition and just opted not to do it. He has said that there was an ongoing IRS audit, which actually would not prevent him from releasing the tax returns, but that was what he said. And I think the Democrats just want to make it clear that moving forward, you know, if there's a presidential candidate, they have to release 10 years of tax returns so that there is transparency with the general public about that person's finances.
Nancy Cook with Politico. Nancy, thank you so much for breaking all this down.
Thanks for having me.